I do think the intersection of Web3 and AI, Web3 and AI agents is very interesting. Lots of experiments. I feel like there's probably more experiments that are going to happen, and we'll see ideas that I'm not even thinking of today. The big difference from BabyAGI 2, BabyAGI 2.0 to what I would say Pippin Lite is the addition of Composio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of AI Agent podcast series. And today probably we have the pioneer in this space, founder of BabyAGI. I think if I remember correctly, at least as per my understanding, it was the first agentic framework that actually brought the AI agent ecosystem into limelight. Welcome, Yohei. Great to have you. And I'm really excited about the chat. Probably the most excited.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a pretty wild month. It was probably because it was so simple, but it definitely kicked off some autonomous agent building around the world.
Yes. I think when was it? I think it was probably around ChatGPT launch, from what I remember.
It was like 3 months after that. Yeah, it was not last March, but the March before that.
Right. Yeah, we have come a long way in the whole AI agent ecosystem for sure.
We have. It was right when GPT-4 came out. It was right after. It was like a week after that.
Yeah. That was the best timing. Would love to kind of start with a bit background about yourself. I know you have kind of Japan, then Seattle, and how does that influence your life and choices?
Yeah, I grew up in Seattle because my dad initially was working at Microsoft for a long time. So I grew up around technology. He left Microsoft to help co-found Ignition Partners, a venture capital firm in Seattle, then started his own company. So I was very lucky to have grown up around kind of technology, venture capital, and startups. Going to Japan was an incredible, both difficult and eye-opening experience. I did it during high school, but I like to think that it made me a more well-rounded person.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think you are one of the few in the space who does venture capital and is kind of known for building as well. I think we all know BabyAGI right now, Pippin, and a bunch of other things. So how do you firstly keep up with both these things, and what's your experience there? And does one affect another?
Yeah, building tools for myself to be more efficient is something I've been doing my whole life. I've never been a developer by trade, but I did start coding pretty early on, starting with HTML, CSS, PHP, kind of as a hobby on the side. When I started my firm, I always I was going to build my own tools because that's always helped me be more efficient. What I didn't know was that if I did it publicly, it would lead to deal flow. So that's something I learned after I started Untapped, but it's something that I've continued to lean in on, where I found that if I open source a project, I will most likely get a couple of founders building in this space reach out. And it sends a signal to people who follow me, my friends. They usually also send me a couple of companies or founders they think I should look into. So today, a lot of the stuff I build is inspired by the builders I engage with on a day-to-day basis, founders in our portfolio company, builders in builder groups and in Twitter. And then we do get a lot of deal flow through the things I build, which we invest in. So it's a nice flywheel.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. I think everybody in the agent space wants to collaborate with you and wants you to be advising in some way or the other. Would love because a bunch of AI agent builders and startups would be listening to the podcast. Would love to kind of let them know and essentially what does Untapped invest in? Is it just AI agents? Is it more than that? What's your investment?
Yeah, we're pretty broad in terms of what we invest in. We're generalist investors. We look across the board. Of course, we do invest in things we know well and as we can provide help. So AI agents are a big focus in terms of, not just building AI agents, but implementing them in smart ways into a more verticalized business. There's a lot of different approaches that I think we're interested in looking at.
Got it. And do you mind sharing some of the companies that
Of course. Yeah. On the more application layer, we've invested in a company called Wakello that does AI due diligence. We use that internally at our venture firm for a lot of diligence. A company called Augie, AUGIE. They do kind of end-to-end video production. So you can give it a prompt, it'll grade the transcript, do a voiceover, chunk up the transcript, find existing media, stitch it together, and give you a full video at the end. We've also invested in a couple of infrastructure like tooling layers. So E2B is pretty well known as a code interpreter, a safe place to run AI-generated code. Payman is infrastructure for AI agents to make payments in a secure way. AutoGrid, going back to the application layer, embeds AI agents into a spreadsheet. So imagine a spreadsheet that fills itself because every single cell has a little mini agent inside it.
Makes sense. A bunch of your portfolio companies are either incorporated in Composio, by the way, just a side note, or kind of are planning to use Composio. So I'm really excited.
I hope some of them heard about it through me because I've been a big fan of yours.
Thanks. Yeah. Would love to kind of shift to like general build and kind of general philosophy in life. I think you're known for kind of like a build and public approach. Could you explain why you find it so like important and beneficial? And yeah, how does it help you and others?
I get this question a lot, especially from people who are worried about sharing their ideas. And I'll caveat that there are times where it does make sense for you to go heads down and work on your idea if it's truly unique, especially if you're building a company around it, if it's a problem that you're very passionate about. In my case, and for a lot of people who are earlier in their journey, I think learning is actually the priority. In which case, for me, building publicly increases the feedback kind of flow, right? I have more people looking at my projects, meaning I get more feedback on it. So I learn faster. And oftentimes when I share an idea, if it's a simple idea, people will share a lot more ideas on top of it, which drives the direction of the project itself, because I'm kind of collaborating with other people's ideas as I think about what to do next. You asked earlier about how, venture capital and building tie in together. I think a lot of my projects are well known for being kind of innovative and new and timely to where innovation is. And I think the reason I'm able to do that is because I'm a VC and I'm exposed to all these ideas on a day-to-day basis. I think if I drop VC and became a builder full-time, my ideas would actually be less innovative because I'm not spending all day, racking my head around like what's the most interesting innovation happening in the world right now.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Essentially, you are kind of always on the lookout for kind of like the next big thing as a VC, and you want to build that yourself and kind of, in some sense, kind of be the pioneer or like instigate that in the world by your eyes.
And by like, can I build a prototype of an idea that I feel like we're ready to start seeing in the world? And if I prototype it and it's simple and clean and I share it, it might inspire a couple people to start working on that idea. And if people are already working on it, it's kind of likely that gets sent to them at some point, in which case they become aware of me and then come pitch me on the company they're building.
Got it. And like, what's your like thought process when you are kind of picking up what to build? I think there will be a lot of things that will come to mind, right? Like, because as like, even when I think about future, there are kind of a bunch of things that I feel like will happen, but do you have like a way to kind of choose amongst those?
When it comes to building, especially because I build, at night and on the weekends, right? It's an ongoing hobby that I've been doing for years. But one thing I optimize for is making it fun for myself. Because as soon as it starts out feeling like a chore, it's hard to kind of continue. Like it's hard to like stay up on a weekend night building if it feels like a chore. So one rule I have for myself is that I don't actually decide what I'm working on until I sit down. At any given moment, there's a lot of projects I want to work on. But usually just through my day-to-day, following what's happening in the world, tracking the news, being exposed to ideas, there's a couple that bubble up as like, ooh, I really want to work on this. And so usually when I sit down at night, even though I haven't decided, usually there's like a couple things that like I've been itching to try out. And then I'll just sit down and like jam out.
Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. I think like you don't want to procrastinate or you don't want to kind of essentially go into analysis paralysis. So when you are into kind of building mode, you just kind of, decide at that.
Sometimes if I do come up with an idea that I want to see if it works, I'll just quickly open ChatGPT o1 Pro and spend a minute describing it in detail and pressing go. Sometimes when I sit down at night, I have 3 or 4 ChatGPT conversations where they've already started the project, and it could be 4 different projects. So I might just pick one and be like copy paste in your repo and let's just like start building on top of this.
Nice. Yeah, and this kind of moves me to the next part of the podcast, which is like BabyAGI, which is like a big part of like the whole agent space. I would love to understand it has become like very iconic in the space, right? As the pioneer of the agentic framework and kind of paving the way for kind of some of the ideas that a lot of other frameworks are using right now. Would you mind sharing the origin story around it? How did
Yeah, the origin story was watching a group or a community called Hustle GPT. They were using ChatGPT as a co-founder, saying, I have $1,000, help me grow it. And they were doing whatever ChatGPT told them to do. And it seemed like a really fun ecosystem community and movement to be part of, but I didn't have the time to do that. And since people were just doing what ChatGPT told them to do, I started thinking, can we just have AI do the human part as well? So the challenge I gave myself that weekend was to prototype what I would call my first AI startup founder. And when I posted a video online, it was other people who actually realized that the system could do more than just be a startup founder. And one of my friends actually in the comments said, "Bro, did you just build BabyAGI?" So I chose that as the name and open sourced the code. And since then, it's been a platform for me to share ideas around how to build better autonomous agents. So I've done a couple of iterations. Initially, they were named after animals. So I had baby bee AGI, baby cat AGI. I then eventually got to baby AGI 2, baby AGI 2.0, which was kind of the second batch of iterations. And I'd say kind of the third batch is what you've seen recently that I've called Pippin, which is the Pippin framework for 24/7, digital beings, which is more on like getting something to exist 24/7. And then there's Pippin Lite, which is more of a one-shot focused on close-ended tasks. And relevant to this conversation is the big difference from baby AGI 2, baby AGI 2.0 to what I would say Pippin Lite is the addition of Composio. Oh, one thing we kept running into, or I kept running into, was I don't want my frameworks to get big, right? If AI is good at writing code, why can't we have AI build its own code? Why do I have to build every integration? But when it comes to general code, AI is good at it. But when it comes to integrations, it's hard to ask a model to do it well because the integrations themselves change all the time. The documentations change. So it's really easy for a model to get outdated. And one workflow I had done, and was pretty common in code building that I used to have, was building in a step to search for the documentation and scrape the documentation. But that in itself also takes time, it can be a little bit slow. And so being able to use a tool like Composio that stays up to date on all these authorization across different platforms to unify it was a major time saver in terms of building all the integrations. But I'd say even it's a major kind of efficiency solver when it comes to like how many lines of code I need to get an agent to do something. So I was really impressed, I think, with Pippin Lite, right? I think it's at 227 lines of code. I mean, I've gotten it to OAuth into X, GitHub, Airtable. It's pretty amazing. So good work to you guys on that.
Thanks again for the shout out. And like, yeah, I think we're kind of working our asses out to make it even better, I think.
Yeah. That's a challenge, right? Because there's OAuth, there's API keys, there's client ID, there's just a lot of different options. But you guys have done a good job of trying to like simplify it so that it can handle different types of auth with a single endpoint.
Yeah, I think kind of comes from the feedback that we get from like users and like users like you, which makes our life easier. But yeah, I think on the BabyAGI, like, did you expect the viral response it got? Like when you released it, it was like, I think probably it is still one from what I remember. Like that's the first thing I remember seeing it in the agent space, and that's what motivated me honestly to move to the agent space.
I did not expect it to go viral. If you go to yohei.me, you'll see my building public log where, kind of leading up to BabyAGI, I was probably pushing out 1 or 2 different AI projects a week. BabyAGI was probably project number 70. Again, it was a project I thought of on a Friday, pushed it out on a Monday. I kind of just like whip out projects on a weekend. I did not expect it to be any different from my previous 70. So it was a complete surprise. I actually had spring break scheduled right afterwards. So I remember being in Los Angeles with my family at an Airbnb. I usually try not to be on my phone too much when we're on vacation, but I was telling my wife, honey, I have to be on my phone. Something I did just went viral. It's like, what is it called? BabyAGI.
Right. That's a story for, I think, remembering.
Yes.
Yeah. What are some of the key lessons do you think that while building BabyAGI? I'm pretty sure, like, I think I personally learn a lot when I'm building rather than just using something, right? So you would have learned a lot of how AI works, how ChatGPT was working. Mind sharing some of them because I think they're still really relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think in building it, if you start simple and then slowly add to it, I mean, that sounds so obvious, but if you start simple, like keeping the code very simple and minimal helps me learn a lot, because one of the ways you can iterate on it is just giving the whole code to ChatGPT and asking it to update it. I just like this. That's how I code, even with Pippin Lite. I'm grabbing the entire code and like iterating on how to improve it by just feeding the entire thing into O1 Pro.
Right.
So that's something I do often to iterate on the code, to learn about the code. I'll stick it into Claude and ask it to turn into a mermaid.js diagram. But I think with LLMs or AI, or especially agents, right? If you use Cursor or Replit Agent, it can really make the iteration cycle rapid, right? Like I build every weekend. I'm able to produce one prototype almost every weekend.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like another project that you have, that's a coding agent, right? Ditto.
Ditto, yes.
Yeah. How do these projects fit together in your like probably broader AI thesis? What is Ditto about? I think.
Yeah, so for Ditto, that was one of those ideas that just popped in my mind one night, and I was like, because I had done a version of it before that was a little bit less elegant, but I was thinking, oh, could I get AI to just write code and then run it? Like, can I just build a self-code? Like, what's the simplest version of Devin that I could create? And the architecture just like popped in my mind, I think, when I was like putting my baby down or something. And I remember like with Ditto, I built and like pushed it in one night because I had to just get the idea out. And then that was what inspired BabyAGI 2.0, right? Because they have the same pattern, but Ditto was like simpler, focused on a Python Flask app. And then after playing with Ditto, I was like, oh, this could actually be turned back into a BabyAGI mod and be more dynamic. But yeah, Ditto was one of those that just popped to my mind as an idea, and I had to try it out.
Got it. And next project, obviously, like which is right now going the most viral, is Pippin, the AI influencer. I think it got open source probably yesterday, right? Like after a bunch of hiccups around GitHub site, which was very hilarious. But yeah, what sparked the idea around that, like to create a AI digital influencer?
Yeah, that was completely vibe based. I posted a picture of an SVG unicorn on Twitter. Somebody asked what its name was, so I posted the picture into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT gave it the name Pippin. Next thing I know, there was multiple tokens, meme coins called Pippin, some of which were sent to me. I had been looking at the rise of AI agents in crypto space as a curious bystander until that point. But I was curious enough that I felt like, hey, this seems like a good opportunity to lean in. So I bought one of the tokens, told people I did, and somebody suggested I build an AI Twitter account. So I was like, oh, this sounds perfect. I have the right experience for it. So I created an AI Twitter account that's been running 24/7. The character takes naps, goes on walks, and occasionally tweets about its experiences. It's been running, fully autonomously since the beginning of December. And then I think at some point somebody on Twitter suggested I release a framework. I guess that was trending. Again, I'm just kind of listening to the feedback that I'm getting from the community. And then over winter break, when I was refactoring my AI unicorn, I thought, I'm doing a refactor anyways, might as well parse out the config and make it a framework. And so that was a 4-week project to get the framework ready to release, and then a 1 week waiting for GitHub to let me release it. But that's come out, and we have a couple people starting to build on top of it.
Yeah, I'm proudly one of the people out there in the community. Really proud.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and it has gone through roof, right? On the coin kind of offering side as well. I don't know. I haven't kind of seen the current numbers, but I think I remember it was like around 400 million when I last saw it.
I think it shot up to 300 at one point. But yeah, it's a very, very volatile asset class where it goes up and down heavily based on news that's related to the project, news that's related to other projects, and just global news as well, right? Trump's announcements heavily impact all tokens right now. So it's a pretty fascinating, but also challenging space for people to invest in if they're not familiar with crypto.
Yeah, and how do you see like it evolving now? Like are you planning? I know you released the open source framework around it. So what are your future plans with Pippin?
Yeah, well, we'll have the core framework out. So now for me personally, I want to migrate my AI unicorn onto the framework, right? Guys, I did the refactor, but I haven't shifted over to the framework. So that's kind of a big to-do for myself. In building Pippin Lite, I realized, this is almost turning into a collection of open source AI projects. So set up a Discord to have the discussions with developers around different, open source approaches to building autonomous agents. At this point, I kind of feel like I should just brand all my open source autonomous agent related projects as like a different Pippin. And so you'll probably end up with a library of different Pippin approaches. I think of it just like as the next chapter of BabyAGI. I'm there's motivation or incentive for me to just brand everything I build as Pippin now.
Got it. And any advice on people who want to use Pippin that you have? Like, it's a general question, but yeah, I think a lot of people want to use Pippin, like the framework.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in kind of the digital being approach of building an AI that's just 24/7 going on a loop, figuring out what it's able, what it has access to in terms of activities and just taking action on that activity, I think this is a pretty interesting framework to play around with. Probably more on the entertainment side, less so on the business side. I think for business, you might want it to be more efficient in terms of like running parallel tasks and those kind of things. But be running time tasks, this one's more like doing one task at one activity at a time, like deciding to take a nap or deciding to do, build a podcast. So probably more for entertainment use cases. But I think it's a great framework for managing a 24/7 being. And then Pippin Lite is probably a better framework or a better starting point for people who want to experiment with getting autonomous dynamic agents to work better. Right? It's very simple, 227 lines of code. I've already started one version where I'm messing with memory so that it'll store the params it uses for Composio tools. It'll store code that works and then can reuse them. I haven't gotten it to work, but I think that's an interesting experiment there. I also have another one that I started playing around with where you have kind of an orchestrator who's assigning different a chain of tasks to multiple Pippin lights. Yeah, so I think in terms of for the experimenter, I'd say go with Pippin Lite. For the person who wants to launch a digital being, go with the Pippin framework.
Yeah, makes sense. I think I think a lot of people will reach out. I think a bunch of issues have started popping in. So yeah, I'm really excited for the framework. I think now shifting gears from like builder mode to kind of investor mode. Have a bunch of a few questions there, kind of like from an investor's standpoint, what makes like an AI startup right now like stand out in today's landscape? Because like I think there are so many startups that have come up, right?
Ultimately it is needing a strong narrative is always true in any fundraise, right? Understanding your own strengths, understanding your team's strengths. Again, these are kind of obvious stuff, but those are always going to be true. And depending on the business you're running, what you should and your strength, your focus should probably be different, right? Like if you're a killer, BD person, right? Like you should have, pilots, design partners, LOIs lined up. If you're extremely strong technically, I would expect to see a strong kind of demo or, and I'd probably dig in more there. Regardless of what you're strong at and lean in on that strength, you do still need to talk to a lot of external people, both customers, to understand and make sure you're building the right thing, and talk to different investors along the way so you at least get a good sense of the feedback you would get on your current pitch. And I think if you combine all those, like your initial idea evolves over time. And I think in talking to founders, it becomes clear when you're talking to a founder who is really focused on learning, both from just the different discussion, putting stuff out there. And I think that's what attracts me the most is especially at the early stage, because there's so many unknowns and the market is moving fast. I tend to lean in towards founders that I feel like are quickly learning and iterating and adapting the feedback.
Yeah, I personally think there's no other way right now. Like the kind of LLMs, like there's every other day something new blows us apart, some new launches are happening. You have to be very nimble in kind of making sure you're like kind of on the right trajectory, you're not getting killed by the next launch. It's like definitely a very like hard but very interesting time to be a founder. I mean, yeah, I think timing and all those things probably matter a lot right now. Yeah. Would love to understand like how I think like you definitely have a bunch of companies, right? Vocalo you mentioned, Autogrid slash Cognosis, and Character. I think some of them have like really solid kind of influencer type founders as well. Do you have a preference for kind of like I don't know? I'm pretty sure you get a bunch of your deal flow as well from Twitter. You mentioned.
Yeah. By no means is having an influence on Twitter a requirement for us to invest. If anything, if somebody already has too much influence, is pretty well known. I worry that the deal gets expensive quickly, right? If everybody knows of it. I do like founders who are interested in communicating and marketing more, but by no means do I care if they have that following now, because that's something I can help them build.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you see some common pitfalls or kind of misconceptions among startups and like currently the agent space? And any advice on like generally people building in the agent space, like going vertical, horizontal, like something?
I mean, it's not really a misconception, and I don't want to sound mean, but I do often get pitches from people pitching me a very, very novel thing that I've seen a couple of times before. And that always is a little bit like, I get it. Like, I do believe that founders need to focus on what they're building and shouldn't care about competition. But at the same time, if you are pitching somebody on something novel, it should be novel, which means you have to have at least a sense of, what others are doing in the space. So that's one thing I think is helpful for founders to be self-aware of, is like, what are the other options out there? Again, by no means does every founder have to be like that, but that is something that popped to my mind.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think kind of moving to like the future, right? And I think you're really good at, in some sense, predicting the next big thing. We have seen that with like BabyAGI and now with Pippin, etc. So what's your kind of like, what are the trends or developments in AI do you like foresee that will shape the industry in kind of next few years? What are some of the things that you're looking out for?
I think the intersection of Web3 and AI, Web3 and AI agents is very interesting. Lots of experiments. I feel like there's probably more experiments that are going to happen. And we'll see ideas I'm not even thinking of today. But at the high level, I think the idea of letting agents pay, having custody over wallets, I mean, that's more, which seems like an obvious one. Tying monetary incentive to open source movements is something that's new to me that I've been following, and it's interesting as well. And I can see there's both pros and cons to this. I think more on the technical layer, memory feels like a space where we can still continue to improve on, right? We went from basic RAG to graph RAG to hybrid RAG, but I think there is more innovation to be done around kind of complex memory. Especially as we go into enterprise agents, we need to have complex, long-term, full company memory, but with authentication and security and data access controls, which gets pretty tricky. So like, how do you orchestrate that? I think is a kind of thing that we'll continue to see more innovation around. And then also security in auth, as it comes to agents, right? Like we will run into issues, right? How do you solve those potential problems? Payment is an example of like agent payment. If you give them access to your full bank account, the possible downside is huge, right? If somebody prompt hacks it to send all the money, that's all the money in your bank account. So one of the ways they're going around it is setting up a separate wallet for your agent to have access to, and then needing to reload the wallet. But that's just one example of a new solution for a new problem.
No, I think, yeah, a bunch of these things, like the kind of non-determinism part of kind of LLMs, where it's very difficult to control, are like some of the problem statements that a bunch of startups need to work on, essentially, like what happened with Air Canada and a bunch of others, their chatbots. I think, yeah, definitely makes sense. What are some of the, like, I think I'm probably asking it again, but like I think very directed question, because a bunch of AI agent builders and startup, like probably startup builders would be listening to the podcast. What are some of the what are some top advice that you would like to give them around this space?
Whatever you're building or whatever you're already building, it's good to be very creative about different use cases, right? Because oftentimes there might be a more interesting use cases than the one you're thinking about for your technology. I mean, that's happened to me too. And again, that's one of the benefits of putting things out there, because you get that feedback loop. Having a good demo and picking the right demo, I think, is something that could be highlighted more. I have seen many demos on Twitter where the technology is interesting, but I think the demo they choose either doesn't highlight the technology well, or it's just a boring topic that isn't interesting. So like really thinking through, like I do think the virality of an initial demo or launch is highly impacted by the use case, both in terms of fit with the technology, in terms of how it showcases, but also just pure viral potential in the topic you're choosing.
Yeah, I think that definitely, this reminds me of like WorldWare, which got really viral.
They did a great job with that, right? Having that one demo, like if you pick topics that people like, right? I don't know if I did, but when I was doing, knowledge graphs, I mean, this will date me, but I think my first demos that I was testing for myself was, I think I started with doing friends characters, but then when I released it, I think I went with Game of Thrones, which has very complex characters and relationships, but it's a topic that everyone knows about and likes already. And so if I say here, I made a knowledge graph tool, it created a graph of Game of Thrones characters and their relationships. People who are nerds about that show will feel like they need to jump in and analyze it and look at it if it's correct.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that sounds like a fun idea for sure. Yeah. And I think where can like listeners follow your work? I know Twitter, everybody knows about your Twitter, but you mentioned like a blog that you have and other pieces.
Yeah, Twitter's probably the best place to follow me, where I'm most active. If you want to see the things I've built, yohei.me is my public blog, or public build in public log. So it's all the things I've built. And then recently I started sharing a Discord link for the Pippin community, which will be a community for open source autonomous agent developers. You can join with or without being part of the token community. I do force people to verify with GitHub, so it is going to be a very concentrated, developer-focused discussion Discord. So that's a good place to ask me questions about any of my projects. Or I have a couple more generic channels around like memory, tools and auth, and so on, that are broad auto agent topics. So invite anyone to jump in there to share ideas and ask questions.
Yeah. So I think people love to follow you. So I think we'll share the links that you have mentioned in the podcast description, so that can learn from you. But thanks a ton, Yohei, for kind of coming to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.